Dutton Ranch Episode 4 Recap. The day everything was lost. What would you do if everything you built disappeared in a single day? What if the dream you sacrificed everything for suddenly turned into a nightmare? And could Rip and Beth Dutton survive the most devastating blow they've faced since leaving Montana? The answer begins on a quiet Texas morning. The sun rose slowly over the endless plains, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. From a distance, Dutton Ranch looked peaceful. The cattle stretched across the land, and the wind carried the familiar sounds of ranch life. But beneath that peaceful surface, disaster was already waiting. Rip Wheeler stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee in his hand. Like every morning, he scanned the pastures. It was a habit he had developed over years of ranching. Most people wouldn't notice anything unusual. Rip did. Something wasn't right. The cattle weren't moving normally. Instead of grazing and spreading across the field, many stood strangely still. Some appeared weak. Others seemed disoriented. Rip's instincts immediately kicked in. He set down his coffee and headed toward the pasture. As he approached, his concerns turned into fear. One calf stumbled and collapsed. Another animal appeared to be drooling excessively. Several others showed signs of sickness. Rip's heart sank. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't exhaustion. This was something much worse. By the time the veterinarian arrived later that morning, everyone on the ranch had gathered nearby. Beth stood beside Rip, her arms crossed tightly. Carter lingered behind them. The ranch hands watched silently. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to hear what the veterinarian was about to say. After examining several animals, the veterinarian removed his gloves and looked directly at Rip. The expression on his face said everything. The news was devastating. The herd had been infected with foot-and-mouth disease, a deadly and highly contagious disease. For a few moments, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The wind continued to blow across the Texas plains, but it felt as if time itself had frozen. Beth stared at the animals. "They don't look sick," she said quietly. The veterinarian sighed. "That's the problem. By the time you notice it, it's already too late." Then came the words nobody wanted to hear. Every infected animal would have to be destroyed. Every single one. The entire herd. Months of work. Millions of dollars. The future they had been fighting to build.
Gone. Just like that.
The realization hit the ranch like a hurricane. Carter couldn't understand why everyone suddenly looked broken. He watched Beth carefully. Something about her scared him. Not because she was angry. Because she wasn't. Beth Dutton wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening anyone. She wasn't fighting. She simply looked defeated. And somehow, that was much more frightening. Later, Carter entered the kitchen and found Beth sitting alone. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, he asked the question everyone was thinking. What happens now? Beth stared out the window. Beyond the glass, cattle grazed under the bright Texas sun. Animals that would be dead before nightfall. She swallowed hard. Then she turned toward Carter. "I need you to go into town today." Carter frowned.
Why?
"Just go. I can help." "No." The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Beth wasn't asking. She was protecting him. Because there were some things a young man shouldn't have to witness. And what was about to happen was one of them. As Carter drove away, Rip gathered the ranch hands. The atmosphere felt like a funeral. Nobody joked. Nobody laughed. Nobody complained. Rip stood before them. His face revealed nothing. But his eyes told another story. A story of exhaustion. A story of loss. A story of a man who had spent his entire life fighting for land, cattle, and family only to watch it disappear once again. "We lose them all," Rip finally said. Those 4 words shattered whatever hope remained. Several cowboys lowered their heads. Others walked away silently. There was nothing left to say. The law was clear. The herd had to be destroyed. And the task would begin immediately. The rest of the day became a nightmare. Gunshots echoed across the ranch. One after another. Then another. And another. Each shot marked the end of an animal's life. Each shot represented another piece of the ranch disappearing forever. Rip personally participated in the work. He couldn't stand aside and watch others carry the burden. These animals were his responsibility, his livelihood, his future. As difficult as it was, he faced the task head-on. Beth watched from a distance. Every gunshot felt like a punch to the chest. She remembered the sacrifices they had made to get here. Leaving Montana, starting over, building a new future, fighting countless battles, surviving loss after loss. And now fate had found another way to hurt them. For the first time in a very long time, Beth felt powerless. The enemy wasn't a corporation. It wasn't a politician. It wasn't another ranch owner. It was something invisible, something they couldn't fight, something they couldn't outsmart. And that made it even worse. Hours passed. The sound of gunfire eventually stopped. Silence returned to the ranch. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the silence that follows tragedy. The silence that fills the space where hope used to live. Meanwhile, Carter spent the day away from the ranch. He met an older rancher named Dwight White. Unlike most adults Carter knew, Dwight treated him like an equal. The old cowboy shared stories about life, ranching, mistakes, and survival. For the first time in weeks, Carter laughed. He felt normal. He felt free. But as the day continued, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong back home. And when he finally returned to the ranch that evening, he immediately understood. The pastures were empty. The cattle were gone. The mood was unbearable. Even without anyone explaining it, Carter knew something terrible had happened. That night, another shocking discovery emerged. Investigators began tracing the source of the outbreak. What they found changed everything. The disease hadn't appeared naturally. It had been introduced through a recently purchased bull. Even worse, the paperwork accompanying the animal appeared fraudulent. Someone had forged documents. Someone had lied. Someone had knowingly sold infected livestock. Someone was responsible. When Beth learned the truth, her sadness transformed into something much darker. Anger. Pure, burning anger. The kind of anger that had made Beth Dutton famous. The kind that destroyed careers. The kind that ruined lives. The kind that terrified enemies. Rip noticed the change immediately. Hours earlier, Beth had looked defeated. Now she looked dangerous. And honestly, Rip preferred dangerous. Because dangerous Beth fought back. Defeated Beth suffered. The following morning, they tracked down the cattle broker connected to the sale. The man insisted he was innocent. Claimed he knew nothing about the disease. Claimed he had followed procedure. Claimed he was just doing business. Rip listened quietly. Too quietly. The broker mistook that silence for weakness. It was a mistake. A very big mistake. Without warning, Rip punched him. The impact sent the man crashing to the ground. Years of frustration exploded in that single moment. The loss of the herd. The destruction of their future. The endless cycle of setbacks. All of it poured out through Rip's fists. For a brief moment, nothing else mattered. Not the money. Not the law. Not the consequences. Only justice. Beth watched the confrontation unfold.
She didn't stop Rip.
She didn't encourage him either. Because deep down she understood something important. No amount of revenge would bring back the cattle. No amount of violence would restore what they had lost. But some wounds demanded a response. And this was one of them. Later that night, a fire lit up the Texas sky. Flames rose high into the darkness. The cattle broker's trailer burned. Nobody officially claimed responsibility. Nobody admitted anything. But the message was impossible to misunderstand. Someone had crossed the Duttons. And there would be consequences. The fire burned for hours. Visible for miles. A warning to anyone thinking about taking advantage of the ranch. The Duttons might have suffered a devastating loss. But they were still standing. And that made them incredibly dangerous. As midnight approached, calm finally returned. Rip sat alone on the porch. The stars stretched endlessly above him. The empty pastures lay before him. Places that once held hundreds of cattle now sat silent. For perhaps the first time in years, Rip allowed himself to feel the weight of everything. Not anger. Not determination. Not courage. Just sadness. The simple sadness of a man who had lost something he loved. A few moments later, Beth joined him. She carried a bottle of whiskey. Without speaking, she sat beside him. For several minutes, neither said a word. Sometimes words aren't enough. Sometimes silence says everything. Finally, Beth took a drink and handed him the bottle. Rip accepted it. He stared into the darkness. "How many times can someone start over?" he asked quietly. It was an honest question, one without an easy answer, because their lives had become a series of fresh starts. Every victory seemed temporary. Every dream seemed fragile. Every success felt one step away from disaster. Beth thought carefully before responding. Then she gave the only answer she truly believed. "As many times as it takes." Rip looked at her. And despite everything that had happened, he smiled. Just slightly. Because that was who they were. Not quitters. Not victims. Survivors. The wind swept across the empty ranch. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. A storm was coming. But then again, storms always came. The real question wasn't whether the Duttons would face another challenge. The real question was whether anything could finally break them. And after everything they had survived, the answer seemed clear. The herd was gone. The money was gone. The dream had suffered another devastating blow. But the Duttons were still standing. And as long as they were standing, the fight wasn't over. In fact, for Rip and Beth Dutton, the biggest battle might only be beginning. And that is how episode 4 ends, leaving us with one huge question. If losing an entire herd couldn't destroy the Duttons, what will happen when they finally discover everyone responsible for this disaster? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.